And to RSVP, call 812-482-1805.
What's stopping you from becoming a Catholic?
Why can't women become priests?
Why do Catholics worship Mary?
What's stopping you?
Why do I need to confess my sins to a priest?
Where is purgatory in the Bible?
What's stopping you?
I think the Pope has too much authority.
What's stopping you? You are called to communion with Dr. David Anders on the EWTN Global Catholic Radio Network.
Hey everybody, welcome again to Call to Communion. This is the program for our non-Catholic brothers and sisters, those of you who have questions about the Catholic faith. Maybe you yourself are a fallen away Catholic. Maybe you left the Catholic faith sometime around high school. But now you're looking at it again, but you've got a couple of questions that really need to be answered. Let's take care of that right here and right now. Our phone number, 833-288-EWTN. That's 833-288-3986. You can also text the letters EWTN to 55000. Wait for our response and then text us your first name and your brief question. Message and data rates may apply. Again, the phone number, 833-288-EWTN. If you're watching us on TV right now, you too can join in by sending us an email, ctc@ewtn.com, ctc@ewtn.com. Michael Birchfield is our producer here. Rich Jesse is our phone screener. Jeff Burson is on social media, so he can pass along any questions you may want to pose via Facebook or YouTube. And I'm Tom Price, along with Dr. David Anders.
Tom, how are you today?
Couldn't be better, and how about you?
Doing pretty well, thanks.
That's a good thing. We're going to lead off with an email here from Rick in Myrtle Creek, Oregon. Rick says, is it true that Jews believe that the coming Messiah is only a holy human and not an actual person of God as we know it?
I don't know what you mean by person of God. If you mean a divine person,
I guess
as in the incarnation of Jesus, of course, they don't believe in the doctrine of the incarnation, not the incarnation of Christ or any future incarnation. So that would be correct.
Okay. Here's one now from Tom who says, what is the strongest Protestant argument against the Catholic Church? You know, we've been doing this for a while. I've never seen that particular question.
Yeah. So this is funny because typically I'm trying to refute arguments against Catholicism. So what is the strongest argument against Catholicism? Well, let me kind of go back into my own imagination back when I was a Protestant. And I think there are arguments that Protestants bring forward that strike the Protestant in his own theological paradigm as very compelling, that stop to seem compelling once you really understand both sides of the issue. Then there are those arguments that, like if I were going to advise a Protestant on how to attack Catholicism, I would give them different advice than what I used when I was attacking Catholicism. So when I was a Protestant attacking the church, it seemed to me like a slam dunk that Catholics had gotten the doctrine of justification wrong. Because, hey, there it is in black and white. A man is justified by faith and not by works of the law. Just seemed patently obvious to me that Catholics got that story wrong. Then I did a lot more digging, read a lot of biblical commentaries, read a lot of the fathers of the church, and I saw what Paul means by justification, what he means by faith, what he means by works of the law, that I was importing a lot of my own presuppositions into the meaning of those words, and I derived a content that Paul himself did not intend, and the thing fell apart for me, and I ultimately became a Catholic, because my strongest argument against the Catholic Church fell apart on biblical exegetical grounds. Today, from where I'm sitting, I think it's not unanswerable, but I think sort of existentially, the one that hits you in the gut the most is the Catholic claim that the sacraments can bring about holiness in a soul, or that the Catholic Church itself is qualitatively holy. That seems to fly in the face of my experience of Catholics, myself included, right? Because I'm keenly aware of the areas in my life when I lack holiness, where I lack holiness, and the manifest failures of the Catholic hierarchy have been evident for 2,000 years. And so I would say, from the point of view of a skeptic, it strains credibility
Yeah.
to argue that these sacraments can convey holiness of life. Now since I've gone and poked, I got to go and respond to that, right? I've just set up the own attack on myself, right? So how do I respond to that? Well, the response is given to us many places in the tradition. I think one of them that I love is in Pius XI's encyclical on Christian marriage. And he says, quite frankly, it's called Casti Connubii is the name of the letter. He says, for many people, the grace of the sacrament of matrimony, and you could apply this to all the sacraments, is like a talent buried in a field. It's unused, and it's not fruitful because people don't cooperate with grace. And so the deeper understanding of this mystery is once you really understand what it means to believe in one holy Catholic and Apostolic Church, it means that you believe that in an institution that is absolutely suffused with sinners, that there are opportunities for grace, there are occasions to meet God, which, if seized, which, when taken with both hands, so to speak, and brought to heart, will effect the holiness of a St. Francis of Assisi, or of a Catherine of Siena, or of a Mother Teresa of Calcutta, or of a St. Augustine, or of a St. Thomas. And that's why the saints themselves are so important in the apologetical work of the Church, because we can hold these in front of the world and go, look, it really does work. And the fact that it doesn't bring about those effects in everyone is, in fact, part of the package. It doesn't work by magic. It requires cooperation and with grace. Okay. But I think that's, for me today, like if I were going to wake up in a bad mood and like grit my teeth and say, why do I put up with this stuff? That would be the thing that hits me the most. But then I turn around and I look at those saints that have meant so much to me in my own life, and I see the work of holiness in those around me. Like my wife. I mean, she didn't like it when I put her up on a pedestal like this, but if you knew our experience, like before and after entering the Catholic Church, it's so qualitatively different that those that knew us said it's like you guys were reborn. Hey, how about that?
How about that? Here's one more now from Tony. Do we have any teaching on why Jesus descended to the land of the dead and why he waited until Sunday to resurrect?
Yeah, thank you very much. Appreciate it. Christ descended to the realm of the dead to liberate the souls of the fathers that were awaiting the coming of the Messiah, the righteous dead of the Old Testament, who he liberated and brought with him to heaven at the Ascension. He waited until Sunday. I think there are probably a lot of reasons, and there's some there are multiple explanations for that in sacred scripture, but one of them is that, of course, he was put to death on Friday, right? And, run out of time. Quick. It was the first day of the week. And there's great significance in that, because in the resurrection of Jesus, it is as if he creates the whole world all over again in his own person and starts the cycle of creation anew on a new day.
All right. We are back in just a moment here on EWTN's Call to Communion. Our phone number 833-288-EWTN. That's 833-288-3986. Stay with us. And we welcome you to Call to Communion here on EWTN. Our international line, if you are watching us from outside the U.S. and Canada, is country code 1 and then 205-271-2985. And for everybody else right here in the good old USA and Canada, your number 833-288-EWTN. If you're ready now, let's go to the phones and talk with Lois in Edmond, Oklahoma, listening on Oklahoma Catholic Broadcasting. Hey, Lois, what's on your mind today?
Hello, Dr. Anders. Thank you for taking my call. First of all, in living or defending our lives as Catholic Christians, just like you did just a few minutes ago, we often use encyclicals to defend or to explain, a particular way of life or teaching or belief. What weight do all the papal encyclicals carry in church teaching? And do they, each of them from every age, carry the same force of obligation on the part of the faithful?
Thank you. I appreciate the question. It depends entirely on the weight that the Pope himself places on the teaching contained in the encyclical or other papal document. So if the Pope were to use the medium of an encyclical to make an infallible dogmatic declaration, for instance, which is very rare, then that would carry the weight of infallibility, and one would have an obligation to surrender the assent of faith as to something as divinely revealed. Then that's the highest level of authority that can be ascribed to a teaching. All right. And I'm talking now kind of more generally about a whole host of papal documents, and some of them are titled encyclicals, and others are bulls, and some are apostolic letters, and some are apostolic constitutions, and this kind of fine parsing of titles. But the principle you understand. Generally speaking, when the Pope engages in teaching, he's exercising his ordinary teaching office. In the same way that a pastor who gets up on a Sunday morning and preaches a homily is participating in the ordinary magisterium of the church.
Right.
Pope's words obviously carry a lot more weight and authority than that of your parish priest who's preaching a homily on Sunday. But it's an order of magnitude. It's not qualitative. Well, it is qualitatively different, but it's not to the level of infallibility. It's just this is the Pope doing his job of interpreting the faith, presenting it, and emphasizing those aspects of the faith that he thinks needs emphasis. Now, in his job of his ordinary teaching authority, he can draw doctrinal conclusions and analyze a set of propositions that he concludes to have been defined through some other medium, like other than his own infallible declaration. And John Paul II does this, arguably, in Ordinatio Sacerdotalis, when he does not use the language of an infallible definition to teach the doctrine that only men may be ordained to the clerical state. So he's exercising his ordinary magisterium, but in his ordinary magisterium, he tells us that this is something that is irreformable and has been handed down by sacred tradition as part of the deposit of faith. And that's the same kind of language that Paul VI uses in Humana Vitae. So the document itself doesn't bear the marks of the Pope intending an infallible definition. On the other hand, he is teaching us that the doctrine about contraception has been infallibly defined by the ordinary magisterium of the Church, and he's adverting to that tradition in an authoritative way. So that's a nuanced difference between those two kinds of statements. And then, sort of on down the line, popes can offer all kinds of teachings that don't come with that kind of heavy-duty authority, all the way down to just kind of prudential advice. Like, hey, bet on the Red Sox this year. Although that's not they haven't actually done that, right? But they do all the time over the course of history make prudential interventions into, say, civil politics, for instance, or comments on policy. In the Middle Ages, they made prudential judgments about when to go to war in defense of the papal states. That kind of thing. Those sorts of things are definitely not covered by the charism of infallibility, and they can be erroneous. And so this is why the work of Catholic theology can be a little tricky, and require some expertise in the language and the documents and to know the history to go and kind of weigh and parse these things and assign sort of a weight of importance. But it's not just a morass. It's not just totally confusing, because remember, one of the gifts that the Catholic Church has is a living magisterium. So sometimes the weight of a particular doctrine or document is just manifest, it's just clear. Other times there still may be lingering questions or doubts or confusion. The benefit of having a living magisterium is if the Pope or the bishops decide that confusion merits or warrants cleaning up, well, they can just continually clarify.
Sure.
And think about the way the dogma of Christ's divinity and humanity kept being restated over and over and over again in the first 7 ecumenical councils of the Church. And Nicaea was pretty clear. But, obviously there were some people that didn't quite get it, because then they had to follow up with Constantinople. Sure. They added yet more clarity, and then more clarity again at Ephesus, and then yet more again at Chalcedon, and on and on and on. That's one of the benefits of having a living magisterium.
Okay. Hey, Lois, thank you so much for your call. We do appreciate that. That opens up a line for you right now, 833-288-EWTN. If you have a question for Dr. David Anders, 833-288-3986. Let's go now to Janine in Washington, D.C., listening there on Guadalupe Radio. Hello, Janine. What's on your mind today?
Hi, yes. I had a question about the rosary.
Mm-hmm.
I know that we are called to pray the rosary every day, and I was wondering if there was a specific rosary that was necessary, or if saying the Divine Chaplet or like Mary Undoer of Knots was sufficient.
Okay, thanks. So there's no canonical obligation for Catholics to pray the rosary every day. All right, there is a canonical obligation for Catholics to go to Mass once a week and on holy days of obligation, and to keep the church's fast and so forth. But there's no precept of the Church, and there's no liturgical law or canon that requires Catholics to pray the rosary every day. So if you omit the rosary one day, nothing bad will happen to you, all right? That doesn't mean that I'm not advising you to pray the rosary. Praying the rosary is a great devotion. Now, there are plenty of people who have claimed private revelation and claim to have received words from the Blessed Mother or from Jesus or the saints admonishing us to pray the rosary. The weight that those statements have in Catholic tradition is that they are private revelations, which is that we are free to believe such things if they've been approved by the Church and if they aid us in our spiritual journey, but we're not free to impose them on somebody else and to demand that someone follow a particular devotion, including the rosary, as if that were the be-all and end-all of the Christian faith. Now, we all know that the rosary is very helpful, very useful, and many popes and saints and holy people have encouraged us to take it up as part of our devotional life, and I'm very fond of the rosary, and I'm not knocking the rosary at all. But to suggest that we have a sort of universal and binding obligation as Catholics to pray the rosary every day is just false. You don't have that obligation, not in that way.
Okay.
Now, we are obligated to pray. You have to do some devotion. You have to do some prayer, all right, in your private life all the time. Rosary is an eminent form of devotion. The other prayers that you referred to, like invoking Mary Undoer of Knots or praying the Chaplet of Divine Mercy, this is not what's meant by the rosary. The rosary is a specific devotion consisting of a series of defined meditations on the life of Jesus and the Blessed Mother, with a cycle of prayers around the Lord's Prayer and the Hail Mary, with meditations upon the mysteries. That's what's meant by the rosary. If that's what you intend to practice, that's what you're doing. But if you wish to take up another devotion, that's also perfectly acceptable. Just do something.
Sounds like good advice to me. Janine, thank you so much for your call. This is Call to Communion here on EWTN. We're going to go right now to Ed in Boston, listening on the Station of the Cross. Hello, Ed. What's on your mind today?
Hi. I believe I have a vocation to be a religious brother, and I'm running into obstacles with communities because of my age. I'm over 55, and most communities won't accept anyone over 35 or 40. And I have been in touch with one community of Benedictines in Petersham, Massachusetts. I spoke to them, and I sent them a detailed email, and I am a former religious. I was a brother 40 years ago with the Passionist community. And so I, told them about my previous experience, and they don't believe that that was good enough experience to join them.
Okay, Ed, what is your question then?
My question is how can I find a religious community that will accept someone my age?
Okay.
Okay, thanks, Ed. I really appreciate the question. You're going about it the only way there is to go about it, which is to do the research on religious communities that have a charism that is appropriate for you, and to make inquiries. And while age is a big factor in joining a religious community, because it's a little bit like getting married, it's a big factor. It's not the only factor, and there may be other reasons. I mean, there are religious communities that have inquiries from people that are 18 or 20 or 25, and they don't accept them for some reason other than their age. Mm-hmm. And there are cases of people entering religious life at much older, if the superiors discern that there is a good fit there and it's going to work. And so it's kind of like courting. You really have to just make your inquiries, and you have to meet people, and you have to go on retreats and become familiar with the community, and they have to become familiar with you, and the chemistry has to kind of be there. When you mentioned the Benedictine community, that was kind of my first thought. I thought, you're probably going to have a better shot in a Benedictine community than you are in a religious community that's focused on some sort of external apostolic work. Mm-hmm. And I have known cases of people joining Benedictine monasteries at a later age. Now, the charism of the Benedictines is very, very different from the charism of the Passionists, and that may be something that the Benedictines discerned in that conversation. But again, if you feel called, monastic life is not the same as consecrated religious life that's oriented towards apostolic work in the community. Monastic life is really about the cycle of prayer and liturgy. If that's what you think you're supposed to, and so don't just go picking any old religious community because they'll let you in. The most important thing is to discern your charism. And then you go only to those religious communities that respond to that charism, that express that charism.
Otherwise, you're wasting your time and theirs.
Exactly. If you're a teacher, you don't need to go work in a hospital. If you're a healthcare worker, you don't need to go in a monastery. If you're a prayer warrior, you're going to be miserable, doing administration.
Sure.
You've got to find that charism, and then you go to those communities. And look, if God wants this to happen, it'll happen. But your frustration and the waiting and the indecision, don't ignore those things too as ways in which God is presently at work in your life. So it's not like the thing doesn't get going until you get in. No, the thing is going right now.
That's right.
Work of the Holy Spirit in your life, forming and shaping you in the image of Christ, is at work right now. And getting 20 doors slammed in your face may be the way that God decides to get Ed to heaven.
Could be.
Saint Benoit Joseph Labre, great saint who died in Rome. He was French. You probably figure that one out.
Duh.
The reason he got to Rome is he walked from France to Rome and knocked on the door of every religious house on the way there.
Wow.
And everyone told him no. And so he ended up going to Rome, and you go read about him, he found another vocation that was very beautiful, and it was unique to him.
Wow, fascinating. Ed, thank you so much, and we will keep you in prayer, Ed. This is Call to Communion here on EWTN. We're going to go to New Orleans right now and talk with Dominic, listening on the Almighty 690. Hey, Dominic, what's on your mind today?
Hey, guys, thank you for taking my call. So this is in regards to the confessional booth. And in recent times, very recent times, we're seeing another evil appear in the church, that being of priests and elders who are abusing members of the church, young, old, what have you, and also men in the seminary. So at what point, when that priest is continually going to confession, which is assumed, but I would say that's a huge assumption considering his devoutness, if there is any, at that point. At what point does the person hearing the confession have an obligation to report this to either one of his elders, someone above him, a bishop maybe, or to the authorities?
Okay.
And can that be broken?
Okay. So the confidentiality, the anonymity of the confessional can never be broken for any reason whatsoever at all.
Period.
Okay. Period. So it doesn't matter what you say in the confessional, under what circumstance, the priest cannot reveal that to anybody, on pain of his own excommunication.
Mm-hmm.
All right. On the other hand, there are some sins that are reserved to the Holy See for absolution, and to which specific canonical penalties apply. So if a priest commits, and these kinds of sins mostly pertain to clerics, to priests, that is. If a priest commits one of those kinds of sins, your regular parish priest does not have authority to absolve those sins. Now, he still can't reveal that, so that the guy's secret is safe with his confessor.
Mm-hmm.
But if he really wants absolution, he's going to have to go through the apostolic penitentiary in Rome and be subject to some much more severe penances to have those canonical penalties lifted.
Yeah.
And some of these things elicit automatic excommunication in the moment that you commit the act.
Okay. Dominic, thank you so much for your call. We do appreciate that. In a moment, we'll be talking with Greg. He's on the road in Ohio. Also, Carol in Oak Harbor, Washington. Looks like quite a few more here on EWTN's Call to Communion. The phone number 833-288-EWTN, 833-288-3986.
What's stopping you from becoming a Catholic? You are called to communion with Dr. David Anders. 1-833-288-EWTN. 1-833-288-3986.
Glad you're with us here on Call to Communion on the EWTN Global Catholic Radio Network. Back to it now. Let's talk with Greg. He is on the road in Ohio, listening on Annunciation Radio. Hello, Greg. What's on your mind today?
Thank you for taking my call, gentlemen.
Sure.
I had a question regarding the process of sainthood and why it takes so long. I'm speaking specifically on Father Solanus Casey and his trip to sainthood. Why does it take so long? I'm very curious.
Sure. Well, it can take a very long time. I mean, it can take 1,000 years,
yeah.
Right? So the process is a lengthy one. Normally, you have to wait 5 years after the death of the person to open a case. And then if there's sufficient interest and the bishop, the ordinary, that presided over that person's geographical area or their religious community believes this is warranted and there's a kind of a public desire for this, it can proceed to the Vatican for consideration, and then once the case is opened at the Vatican, the person becomes servant of God. That's the title. If the Holy See looks into the person's life and discerns that there was evidence of heroic virtue, then they become venerable, and then you got to wait around for a miracle.
Wow.
If you get a miracle in response to their intercession, then you can be beatified, and you got to fit that into the Pope's calendar, and then you got to wait around for a second miracle for canonization, and all along the way, look, there is a bureaucracy, okay? I mean, it's kind of like, getting a message up to the president or something, or this time the Pope. And obviously, there are people whose cases for canonization generate more popular acclaim and interest, whether inside the Vatican or out.
Mother Teresa.
Exactly. I mean, that was kind of a no-brainer.
Yeah.
And that's going to have an effect because, look, you don't need the Pope to canonize you to get to heaven. I mean, by definition, the saints are in heaven from the get-go. So there are many more saints than there are canonized saints. The point of having a procedure for canonization, it's twofold. One of them is that the Church wants to canonize people that she regards as exemplars of Christian holiness, to hold up in front of the lay faithful, or the whole Church for that matter. Here's what it looks like to live the Christian life heroically and successfully in this context. And we need those kinds of examples because it's wonderful to look back at the apostles or to Christ that lived 2,000 years ago, but can you really do it in the 21st century in Cameroon, or in Indonesia, or in Birmingham, Alabama, or whatever? And so when you find someone in those, or as a doctor, or as a mother, or what, so having these people on display, the Church says, here, look to this person who had your state of life, and you can see that it can really be done. That's very useful. The other reason the Church reserves to itself, the Holy See reserves to itself, the right to declare these canonizations is because we want to prevent saint inflation. And I'll tell you a true story. It took a long time for the Church to get paganism and superstition out of the medieval peasantry, and arguably they still haven't succeeded because there's still a lot of superstition and paganism that creeps in all over the world.
Oh, yeah.
And the Church is always in a battle to kind of purify people's conception of God and the faith and so forth. So I did a lot of research once upon a time into late medieval superstition, the superstitious practices of late medieval Catholics and non-Catholics. And in reading about that, so ethnographic literature, I came across a story about a bishop who was doing a visitation of his diocese, and he finds this little town that has this wonderful devotion to some local saint. And it wasn't no canonized saint, just some personage that had been elevated in the popular imagination. Okay. They were all visiting the tomb and asking for prayers and intercessions. He does a little research and finds out that it's a dog.
Uh-oh.
He's like, not good, guys. Not good. We don't venerate house pets.
Yeah, we love Saint Bernard, but we don't love a Saint Bernard.
Exactly.
Okay.
And it was commonly believed in some places in the Middle Ages that a person who was a hermit and had lived a life of tremendous ascetic abnegation would kind of de facto go to heaven as soon as they died. And that's superstitious also because the Church doesn't teach that. You can't get to heaven on roller skates or by not eating breakfast. You've got to love God and love neighbor. Just because you're a hermit is not going to get you there. But there were, hermits that lived that way. And Church has always had a devotion to relics. Well, here's a superstitious practice that came out of that. There were folks that would see a hermit getting up in age. They'd start kind of waiting around the door, and then what really got crazy is that people from the neighboring village would be getting their eyes on the hermit. And then the people in the first village were this our hermit. You go get your own hermit, okay? And they would post guard because once the guy died, it was like open season on the man's corpse, but everybody's got to have a piece of him, quite literally. We'll get a piece of you, right? I just got to wait till you die to do it. And to kind of put an end to that kind of craziness, Church says, you know what? We get to decide who's a saint. You're not waiting around people's doors for them to kick off so you can start chopping them up, okay?
Love it. All right. Thank you so much for your call. Greg, we do appreciate that. This is Call to Communion here on EWTN. We do have a line open for you, 833-288-EWTN, 288-3986. And if you're watching us today on TV, the email address ctc@ewtn.com. Let's talk now with Carol in Oak Harbor, Washington. Hey there, Carol. What's on your mind today?
How are you doing? I'm fine. I'm making a comment. I want to thank you for the show, and I thank you for taking my call.
Sure.
I'm calling about the rapture of the church because I found the information on 1 Thessalonians 4:17, where it talks about the rapture. Dead in Christ will rise first, and those who remain will be with him in the air, and those who will be with the Lord.
Thank you. I appreciate the comment. Of course, I'm aware of this passage. It's been in the Bible a very long time. It doesn't teach what dispensational theologians mean by the rapture. The fact that the dead in Christ will be caught up to the Lord at his return, at the parousia, the second coming, and they will participate in his glory by way of exaltation. Of course, the church believes that. Absolutely. Absolutely believe that. And there it is in the Bible, as you correctly identified. The church is going to be glorified and exalted with their exalted Lord when he comes back. Yes, absolutely. That's not the doctrine of the rapture. That's not the doctrine of the rapture. That's not what rapture theologians mean when they speak about the rapture. What they mean, what the Protestants mean by the rapture, is that when the church is caught up, it will not be at the second coming. It will be at a secret coming when Jesus removes, quote-unquote, true believers from space and time, and then God pours out his wrath on the nations in a 7-year tribulation. Then Christ comes back a third time. This is the Protestant doctrine, not the Catholic teaching.
Okay.
Then Christ comes back a third time, this time publicly, bringing the church with him, because they've been hiding out in heaven for 7 years.
Mm-hmm.
And then he sets up a physical kingdom with his throne at Jerusalem that will last for 1,000 years, at which time Old Testament prophecies about the victory of Israel will be fulfilled, and goats and bulls will yet again be sacrificed on the temple altar in Jerusalem. That's what the Protestants believe who talk about the rapture.
Wow.
1 Thessalonians chapter 4 does not say that. It doesn't say anything about 3 comings of Christ. It doesn't say anything about Jesus hiding the church out in heaven for 7 years. It doesn't say anything about sneaking back into time when he comes the third time. And it surely doesn't say anything about, us all speaking Hebrew and killing goats and bulls in Jerusalem for 1,000 years with Jesus on a physical throne. So, yes, we're caught up in the air at the second coming, the second and last coming, to share in his exaltation and glory. But that's just the doctrine of the church. That's not the rapture theology.
Okay. Carol, thank you so much for your call. This is Call to Communion here on EWTN. We're going to go to Michelle now, checking us out on Facebook. She says, I'm just curious, if angels don't have bodies, why do we depict them as such?
How would you depict something that's invisible?
Good point.
You could do it like Gary Trudeau. Right? You could have a thought bubble, I guess, floating, in an empty space. Like in Doonesbury?
I guess.
But that would be kind of cheesy to have in a cathedral, don't you think?
Yeah.
So you got to depict them somehow. Plus, I'm being a little bit silly, obviously, but while angels don't have bodies, they can have what's the word I'm looking for? It's not theophany. That's when God makes himself visibly apparent, and hierophany is a word from a different discipline. But they can make there's a word for this. I can't think of it. There's a kind of a manifestation that an angel can make of himself in a sort of pseudo body. It's not a real body. It's not an organism that has biological function. It's the appearance of a human body, so that they can interact sensibly with humans. And we see that numerous times in sacred scripture. They show up. They put on the appearance of humanity, or of some very bizarre form, as in Isaiah chapter 6. Isaiah sees wings and eyes everywhere and all kinds of strange stuff. But that's not their essence. That's not their natural form. That's just an appearance that they've taken on so that they can interact with humans. And so sometimes you could artistically represent that. I think, isn't it Albert Dürer in his beautiful Renaissance woodcuts would always pick these bizarre passages of the scriptures and these apocalyptic texts with angels flying everywhere and swords coming out of Jesus' mouth, and a lot of good Renaissance art would capture not the handsome angels with, shining gold hair and wings, but the really bizarre six-winged business with eyes everywhere,
Wow, that's pretty intense. And we thank you very much for that. Glad that you're watching us today on Facebook, Michelle. This is Call to Communion here on EWTN. Our phone number, 833-288-EWTN. That's 833-288-3986. We'll get to Whitney in Lincoln, Nebraska in just a moment here. If you are running across this term, podcasting or podcasts, I want to get a podcast, or my son is talking about podcasting. Look, be not afraid. All that means is it's audio on demand. So if there's a show that you hear on EWTN radio, like Call to Communion or, Open Line or Catholic Answers Live, any of our great shows, they're available via podcasting by going to our website. Visit EWTN.com/podcast to subscribe. Check out all these great podcasts today. You know what? You can subscribe to them just like you would subscribe to a magazine. And that is very cool. It'll be sitting there in your inbox next time you go online. Call to Communion in progress here on EWTN. We're going now to Whitney in Lincoln, Nebraska, listening on the Great Spirit Catholic Radio. Hey, Whitney, what's on your mind today?
Well, first I wanted to say podcasting is really not that hard. I mean, if you have any app store on your device, you can just go to it and
that's right.
Usually find some. But my question was regarding charisms.
Mm-hmm.
How does one determine their charism on their own, aside from prayer and discernment? Because I've gone through spiritual direction and completing an inventory, but it wasn't very helpful. Just a long list, unless you purchase the package or whatever.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks, Whitney. Yeah, you don't have to purchase anything.
That's right.
To discern a charism. And, charism is a gift. It's a gift. And when it's put to use to serve God and the church, then aided by the Holy Spirit, it can be a spiritual gift. Part of it is what you naturally do well. Now, it can be more than just a natural talent, right? Because the Holy Spirit can come in and energize it. But the Spirit works together with our nature. It doesn't work contrary to our nature. I really, really like, personally, talking on the radio about the Catholic faith. I mean, I just really, really like it.
And you're good at it.
And I have priest friends that I feel like would do a bang-up job at this right here. They know more than I do about all kinds of stuff. And they look at me and go, get me away from that radio microphone. I don't want any part of that. But they're amazingly gifted at administration or maybe preaching a homily or whatever. They have something they're really drawn to do. They derive so much satisfaction out of serving people or serving the church in that way. And if there's something in your life that just, when you get up in the morning, you're just naturally drawn. I mean, I love to get up in the morning and read St. Thomas. I just love to do it. Killed my wife. Drive her crazy to get up and read St. Thomas in the morning. She's going to go to something else. But if you have that thing in your life that, man, I just love doing this, whatever it might be. Maybe it's baking. I don't know. There's a way to put that gift to use for the sake of the church. And you don't have to, these spiritual inventories that you have, you talk about programs. I don't want you to spend any money, right? But the Catherine of Siena Institute is one apostolate that has a program aimed at helping people in churches. And it's not just for individuals, it's for whole parishes to put on called Called and Gifted. It's the only one I know about that's a sort of parish-wide attempt to help people think about their charisms and discern them. But you don't have to have something like that program to do this. You just need a little honest introspection. And maybe ask your friends.
Yeah.
Or you ask your friend, what do you think I'm good at? When you think of me, what do you think? I mean, when I think Tom Price, I'm like, there's a man that was born to be in radio. He probably came out with a microphone in your hand, just born to do it. And your wife, man, is a canary. I mean, you cannot make her stop singing, whatever you do. I mean, it's kind of obvious what the charisms are here. And I think there's a human... And then when you see those things graced by the Holy Spirit, to the extent that you can see such a thing, when someone uses these things for the good of the church and the glory of God, how beautiful is that?
Absolutely. Hey, Whitney, thank you so much for your call, and please keep listening to us here on EWTN. Let's go now to Dakota, who has a question via YouTube. She says, what is the difference between a marriage in church versus a marriage in a courthouse? I am not a Catholic, and I'm in the military. A church wedding would be very hard for us to do at this time.
Okay, thank you. Well, the Catholic Church has a lot to say on this topic. If you are not a Catholic, not even a Christian, let's say, you're an atheist, or maybe you're a Buddhist or a Hindu or something, you can still contract a valid marriage, a marriage that the Church would regard as valid. You have what's called a natural marriage. That's when a man and woman get together because they want to start a family, commit themselves to one another, raise up kids, replenish society. It's a natural institution. We see it all over the world. Kind of know what that means. It's a good thing. It's a good thing. We want to encourage our Buddhist, Hindu, atheist, Muslim, Jewish, anybody else. We want to encourage our friends and neighbors from other traditions to engage in, enjoy, and be faithful to their natural marriages. With a Christian marriage, a little bit different, because it has all those characteristics of a natural marriage, but both of the parties, having been baptized, are made members of Christ. And so by necessity, Christ is implicated in that union in a way that he is not present in the marriage of non-Christians who are not members of his body through baptism and faith. That makes the Christian marriage, so says the Catholic Church, that makes the Christian marriage sacramental. Now, for Catholics, we are obligated to celebrate our marriages in Catholic churches. If you are a Baptist, you are not obligated to celebrate your marriage in a Catholic church. Would I say, and your own church, I think, probably does not require that. It's not a necessity for being married as a Baptist. Would I still recommend, if you are a Baptist, for example, that you marry in a Baptist church? Would I recommend it? I would, and I'll tell you why. Because the physical space, the location of the church, signals to you, to your relatives, to the community, to everybody else involved, that this is a sacred union for a Christian and should be associated with the witness and the ministry of the church, because you want God involved in your marriage from the very beginning, and you want your marriage to be a reflection and an expression of God's work in your life and your love for one another to witness Christ to the world. Now, if you are a Baptist, again, you're not obligated to marry in a Catholic church. The Catholic Church certainly can't obligate you to marry in a Baptist church, and it's better for you. You could be validly married, as far as the Catholic Church is concerned. Two Baptists marrying in front of a justice of the peace in a courtroom can be validly married.
Yes.
And if you are prevented, if it's, it's a really, really serious burden, which I find hard to believe that it would be impossible for you to find a sacred space. But if it was just absolutely impossible, if you're locked up in a Siberian prison and you just can't get out, but you still want to get married, you can do that as a Baptist or a Lutheran or Episcopalian. Catholics would not be able to do that. Catholics do need the presence of a priest or a deacon and a Catholic church to be validly married.
Okay, very good. Appreciate that, Dakota. Thank you so much for your text. Here's one very important. This one is from Marie. Marie says, do wives still have to be submissive to their husbands in cases of abuse of any kind, or infidelity, or addiction such as substance abuse or pornography?
Okay, thanks. I want to draw a really important question, and I want to draw a few distinctions. So just set aside the submission question for a second. Okay. The Catholic Church teaches that in these kinds of cases, you are allowed to withhold conjugal relations, and if you need to move out. And if you need to, even yet again, to seek recourse to the law, maybe a restraining order, or civil divorce if that's absolutely necessary. Now, the fact that a person is civilly divorced does not mean that the church ceases to regard them as married. It just means sometimes people that are in abusive situations really need to get out of there, and they may need to have recourse to law in order to protect themselves against an aggressive or harmful person. And under normal circumstances, we have an obligation to maintain conjugal living. We should live together and relate in all the normal ways as husband and wife. But there are exceptions. These are exceptions. Now, let me spell this out for you, okay? Some detail. If your spouse commits adultery, the church says, if you choose, you may withhold conjugal affection. You don't have to have sexual relations with a spouse that's cheating on you. And pornography falls into that category. And the church says, it's good to reconcile, But these kinds of offenses against the dignity of marriage are so grave and can cause such harm and be so painful and hard to cope with, the Church says it is permissible in these instances to withhold conjugal relations, withhold conjugal affections, and even to separate if necessary. As long as you do, you no longer have an obligation to conjugal living. If at some point you return to conjugal living and normal conjugal relations, the presumption is that you are reconciled and you kind of go back to the way you were before. So if you're in kind of a holding pattern right now and you're like, well, I'm not sure if we should be together, I'm not sure if we should be intimate with one another because this thing is so horrific, better to stay there. Better to stay there, because once you go back home or once you open yourself back up to intimacy, then the Church says, okay, you're reconciled now. You're reconciled. Mm-hmm. Now, when it comes to submission, the issue of submission it's a thorny one, and I'm not going to be able to cover it in detail. The book of Ephesians chapter 5 says that we should be submissive to one another out of reverence for Christ. So there is a submission that husbands owe to wives, and there is a submission that wives owe to husbands. It may be of a different character. There are gifts that men have that women don't. There are gifts that women have that men don't. So, the friendship that characterizes Christian marriage is equal in dignity. It could be different in character. We could parse that at a later time. But your husband owes you a submission. He needs to be submissive to your dignity as a human person. And certainly not to violate that dignity with offenses, the horrific offenses like adultery or abuse. These are a gross violation of the dignity of Christian marriage and the dignity of the woman. And one of the reasons that so many women became Catholics in the ancient world was because, when in the Roman world, the pagan world, women were treated as property. Mm-hmm. They were property. And men were not held to the same moral standards or sexual standards as women by the ancient Roman pagans. The Catholic Church said, no. Men and women are both called to the life of chastity, to the life of purity, to the dignity of continence, and their relationship should be one of friendship, and friendship's always predicated on a certain kind of equality. And women were like, sign me up for that, buddy, And that for the same reason, they also embraced what the Church taught about contraception and abortion. Today, feminists often view these things as oppressive to women in their bodies. Not so in the ancient world. It was very common in those days for men to say, I don't want that baby, we're going to abort it. And that would mean beating women until they miscarried. Yeah. Or I don't want to conceive a child, we're going to contracept. It wouldn't be appropriate to say on the air what contraception in the ancient world consisted in, but it was something forced on women, imposed on them by men who wished to exploit their sexuality. Mm-hmm. Let me just tell you this, it was not a good thing for women. Not whatsoever at all what they would do to them to prevent them from conceiving. Yeah. You can let your imagination run wild on that. Women said, you can't do that to me when I'm a Christian? Sign me up, buddy. Finally, women, the Church, Romans said, you have a moral obligation to marry very young, 12, 13 years old, and bear as many children as you can. Women in the ancient world had to bear about 5 kids just to replenish society. The Catholic Church said, you know what? We venerate as saints women who choose not to marry so that they can be committed to God. Mm. And some of the earliest martyrs in the Church were the virgin martyrs that said no to those kind of marriages so they could commit themselves in their purity to God. St. Lucy, St. Agatha, St. Agnes, many of them are mentioned in the canon of the Mass. And the women said, sign me up for that, buddy. Yeah. Sign me up for that. That is not the paganism I grew up with. I want to become a Catholic because of the dignity with which the Catholic Church regards women.
Marie, thank you so much for your text. And Dr. David Anders, thank you, my friend.
Hey, thanks, Tom.
We do the show each and every Monday through Friday at 2 p.m. Eastern with an encore at 11 p.m. Eastern. We also share with you the best show of the week. We'll play that for you on Sundays at 2 p.m. Eastern. On behalf of our great team here, Michael Birchfield, Rich Jesse, and Jeff Burson, I'm Tom Price, along with Dr. David Anders. Thank you so much for joining us this time around